One of my favourite ways to catch fish in the winter is fishing through the water. It's an absolutely deadly tactic on commercials, and the great thing about it, it catches fish of all species. So it might be a day when the F1s want to feed but the carp don't, you'll catch F1s. It might be a day when the silvers want to feed but nothing else does, you'll catch silvers. This is my banker tactic on commercials in winter. First thing I want to say about it relates to the rig that I choose to use, and it's all about presenting a bait as it falls through the water. So I'm going to show you here, I've got strung out shot, probably 2/3 of the way down the line. These are number 11s. Got a nice light 4x12 float, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 number 11 shot spread out the last 2/3 of the rig. And that's just to create that fall. So when I'm loose feeding bait, my hook bait is being presented as naturally as possible alongside those loose offerings. I know 13 main line on, which is quite robust, but then crucially a nice light 010 hook length. Again, this time of year the water's clear, the water's cold. You've got to present your hook bait as naturally as possible, and the lighter the line you can get away with fishing and still land what you hook, the more fish you'll catch. So obviously when you're fishing light lines and small hooks, and the hook by the way is an 18 Guru F1 pellet, you need to match it to an elastic that's forgiving. And this Preston 8 Dura Holler is absolutely perfect in that regard. Dead soft, dead forgiving, from a 6-ounce roach to a 6-pound carp. Whatever you hook on this, you're not going to bump it and you're probably going to land it. So it's all about scaling down the tackle to match what you're trying to do, which is catch everything. So how do you go about deciding where to fish when you're trying to build a peg and catch through the water? Well, the first and most obvious thing is you've got to do it where you can comfortably loose feed. Now today that's about 14 metres up to the tree in front of me. The great thing about these new Fuka Micros, which I've got here, is they are quite dense. Even though they're small, they're quite dense and they fly very well. You can catapult these comfortably 14 metres. So you can still fish quite long with these and build a peg, even though they're a nice non-selective bait that everything chooses to eat. So I'm fishing 14.5 metres. The second thing is do it towards cover. I've got a nice tree out there. Now clear water, as I said, means fish will hug cover more than ever. So marginal cover can be great. Sometimes loose feeding down the edge can be great this time of year. Or if you've got trees or anything like that in front of you, then make the most of it and loose feed up to that. And then obviously you can present your strung out rig alongside that. Make sure that where you're fishing isn't too close to the danger zone though, especially if you expect the fishing to be relatively good. The last thing you want to be doing is spending half the day untangling from the tree or pulling for a break when you manage to hook a branch. I always keep my Fuka Micros in a little plastic bag, especially on days like this when it's raining, because you don't want them getting wet. If they get wet, they stick together and they don't loose feed as accurately via catapult, so you need to keep them relatively dry in a bag. Now, because we're trying to get fish to compete, the key is to build your peg, and by that I mean start off by feeding little and often. I'm talking 5 micros every couple of minutes until you know how many fish are in your peg. Loose feed, feed to your bites. If you find that you don't get many bites, cut back the quantity that you feed, but still feed fairly regularly. You might feed 2 or 3 micros until you find out that the fish are there. What tends to happen with this kind of method is your swim gets better and better. So even if you have to feed 2-3 micros to start with, as the fish come into your peg and find your bait, and as the fish start competing, because there's not a lot of bait in your peg will get stronger and stronger as that competition between the fish grows and grows. And you might eventually end up feeding far more heavily and fishing a bigger, more selective bait like a Fuka Neons on the hook or a bigger piece of the 2-in-1. So build your peg, that's the first thing. If you can, if it's a difficult day, it can be really good to have other lines on the go, maybe a ground bait line down the middle or a line with micro pellets. Have them lines on the go so you can fish there while you're building your loose feed line up. So it might be that you have the first hour fishing down the middle over ground bait while you're loose feeding your micro line. Or it might be that you start on micros, have a ground bait line as another throwaway line, and a line where you can loose feed pellets. Give yourself options, that's absolutely key in winter. But this tactic is an absolute banker, and you'll generally find it gets stronger and stronger as the session goes on. Loose feed little and often, get the fish competing and fish a nice strung rig. So wherever they are in the water column, you're going to catch them.